Okay, welcome everybody back to another AU Core TDG call as we start really to go through some of the AU Core 3 pieces. Um, just again, a reminder on meeting etiquette, using Zoom, and I can see everybody just about in the list is doing it perfectly, so that's wonderful. It's your name, have your organisation there, use your Zoom reactions, but if you've dialed in, you can just say your name and let me or if someone else is presenting know that you want to ask a question. Um, Feel free to make use of the chat. I will, as the chair of this meeting, attempt to monitor that, but I won't always be as fast on response as I can be. So if there's anything that really the group should be discussing or going through a question, put your hand up and let's actually discuss it. All right, I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country and that we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands in which we all gather today, which for me is the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. And we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And we acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. We've got a rough agenda for today, but I think we have to swap a little bit of the timing around. The proposed agenda for today is going through usual business, um, going through some of the AU Core R3 planning. We've got a couple of speakers today to give us some updates from the agency and from Epic on their community, I guess, pitches and coming through on where that is and what we can expect in terms of timings and content. We do have a proposed change request that was deferred from R2, which is around no known meds. That's been discussed in both patient summary and base, but we need to go through that in core because it would mean a change to the core spec. And then talk about the preparation for the March work group meeting Connectathon. We kind of skipped past that in the last call because we ran out of time, but that's coming up pretty rapidly, and we'll have an AU Core face-to-face meeting, and we'll also have an AU Core track. And we'll talk about what is coming up in the next meeting. So that's the proposed agenda. Is there anything else that people want to add to that today? Not hearing anything. Let's just move along. So let's go with usual business first. Let's talk approval of minutes. Those were sent out. I'll just go there now so that we can just confirm that. What? This has gone to the. Oh, okay. I've linked the wrong thing. That's fascinating. Whoops. Apologies for that. Let me actually take us to the right thing. The call from last week, which is the 5th of February, which is this one. And so we have the agenda, we have our attendees, we've got the slides, the recording, transcript chat log, we have the decisions we made, which is basically minutes approval. And a lot of last week was really around updates. We had the AUCDI folks come and give us updates, including about what might be coming from an AUCDI perspective. We talked about timelines for AU Core R3, in which we kind of agreed that for now we'll go for a yearly maintenance update, but that there may be some triggers to pull that might come from community, jurisdiction, the agency, who knows, on doing a more major release. And we also had a discussion on identifier types, and I did email around that Zulip poll, and I think that's still under discussion. But we might, if Richard's on the line, get a little bit of an update on where that discussion came to. So that was the last call, and those are the minutes that were sent round. Does anyone need more time to review these before we look to approve? All right, thanks, Steve, for popping that in the chat. Not hearing anything, I'll ask who would like to motion approval of the minutes of last call.
I'll make such a motion, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Who would like to second?
I'll second Marika.
Thanks, Marika. Any other questions or comments while I move to find the poll? All right, let me just grab that one. Okay, you should see in front of you the poll for approval of minutes of the previous meeting. Please select affirmative, negative, or abstain. If you can't fill out the poll but have access to the chat, please plop a plus one with either affirmative, negative, or abstain in the chat. And if you've dialed in, just say your name and whether you are affirmative, negative, or abstain. All right, we've got 75% of people have participated, so we still need a few more people waiting on them to click the button or go in the chat. All right, I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll, share the results. So let me just check the chat. Okay, nothing's in there. So that is 15 affirmative, 0 negative, 13 abstain. The motion carries. The minutes are approved. Thank you, everybody. Okay, let's go back to this. In terms of actions and updates, this top one was discussed at the last call. Ruben wasn't on the line, so that was left with Brett to catch up with Ruben and come back to us on where we are in terms of resolving the deferred issue around an updated licensing statement. Brett or Ruben?
Is Ruben up?
I don't know if Ruben is on the line. Let me check. No, he's not on the line.
Yeah, I believe this will be moving to the TSC being formed to set up that official statement. So I don't expect any action until that happens. That is the current state.
So should we update this action to say to when the technical steering committee forms to pass this action to the technical steering committee?
I think that would be the best answer at this point because it's yeah, there's the lic the licensing discussion working group from the board has kind of ended. I think there's a couple of aspects to this as well. I think some of this may go to the terminology work group as well. So I think we should say terminology work group and TSC to finish the licensing statement updates.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any concerns, comments, objections, or questions about, I guess, what is a proposal to move this action item to the forthcoming technical steering committee and terminology work group? All right, well then we'll note that down and put an action on the AU Core co-chairs to move that action item to those groups. All right. There are two other actions that have come out and been updated. There is the one that was assigned to Richard to post types of identifiers Zulip. That's come out, and I emailed that around in the email around like meeting minutes next meeting. So that's come out, and there's quite a few people who have responded. We might have a look at that in a second. And the other update is, yes, the AU patient summary ballot snapshot was published, which is great because ballot opens tomorrow. I wanted to do a quick update on the Zulip polls. I won't talk about all of these because we actually have a bit more detail on both the endpoint and the diagnostic report one coming up. This is the one on use of identifier type. This will impact AU Core potentially. That's why we're highlighting it here. And for those of you who have implemented use of identifiers in systems, please respond to this SULIP so that we can start taking that through. So we've got a few respondents, but looking to the rest of the community to actually say whether or not you've implemented it, and how. The other one I wanted to draw people's attention to is this one. There's been discussions on coming into AU Core R3, actually a profile on composition. And there is a question being put out to the international community for implementers of, well, FHIR clinical documents, that's primary use of composition, really, whether or not they use section.section. And so that's there. I'll also email that around to the group. Please respond into that, and that will feed into both some of the international specifications around FHIR clinical document and IPS, and will also inform the development of a composition profile for AU Core R3. Now, at this point, I need to check. Corey, are you on the line? Okay. All right. I'll just check that later on then. Let's keep going through the agenda then. Reminder about the Connectathon. There's a couple of tickets left. So if you don't yet have a ticket and you want to come along to that, there's the QR code. Please grab those. I'll just let that sit there for a couple of seconds. And there will, of course, be an AU Core track there, along with patient summary, e-requesting, smart forms, and potentially a couple of others. All right. So let us get into AU Core R3 update. Reminder kind of our timeline. Now, we talked about 12 months, so that's really what this is kind of looking like now. We have the time period up to really June to be doing all our development work, all our calls and going through proposals, and that's going to look like Zulip polls. It's going to come in as information sessions. There'll be proposed profiles and other changes. We'll discuss those in meetings, make some decisions. That'll come into a draft IG. Likely, we're going to looking at testing that because we're not going to have anything ready for the Connectathon. Sparked is going to put out an EOI for a Spark testing event like last year, to happen around June, July, so that before we go into ballot, we can host a testing event of the new AU Core content and confirm or find out some of the things we might need to change. With the idea that we then publish in January next year, which is what, 2027 these days, isn't it? January 2027. Okay, so we've got some calls coming up, and we've got some face-to-face events, and there are other things going on as well at the same time. You know, e-requesting is still happening, patient summary is happening, and we might go into some pre-work around Encounter. I'm just going to go, okay, so just reminder, this was what got talked about from community pitches at the November Canberra event. This is kind of what the perspective looks like from what I've heard from people so far about what might change between AU Core R2 and AU Core R3. So what we've got in terms of the green on the left and the orange are the structures that are already in AU Core, but those pluses are where some of the changes that have been put forward by the community, and I'm aware are preparing to come to this group, would change those profiles. The totally new profiles are on the right. Endpoint, diagnostic report, composition, medication dispense. Maybe all of those will come through, maybe not everything will get into R3. And there might even be some new things coming along as well that aren't in this list. Some of the other potential inclusions are the completion of our set of search parameter artifacts. That might happen. That might not. It's on the backlog. And certainly we'll see some change to the capability statement to reflect any of the changes made to profiles or search support. So yeah, that's it at a glance, basically. All right. I might hand over here to Ricardo to talk through where they are on endpoint.
Thanks, Danielle. If you could please move to the next slide, I think. Yep. All right. So just for a bit of context on this one, as part of the work that we're doing to launch the Health Connect provider directory and the Health Connect provider directory IG, so we had the need to include an endpoint profile on that IG, and initially that or the feedback we've received from the community is that we could potentially look at expanding the definition of the endpoint, but still acknowledging that right now it's still very, very limited for the use case that we're delivering through the Health Connect provider directory. So the commitment we've made was to try to do some further work outside of the provider directory project to look at endpoints a bit more widely, and to look for an opportunity to potentially include that into AU Core, which we're currently exploring. So we launched a poll on Zulip to try to understand what the implementation landscape looks like, and I think after that poll, and depending on what comes from it, we'll be determining next steps. So at the moment, we kind of already have an idea that we might have to for this work to really be a bit more meaningful. We'll have to explore how we might define endpoints that are of type FHIR, or whatever we want to call that, but FHIR type endpoints. Currently, that's not something that we've done, and that's probably something that we'll need to do next in this space. So it doesn't really, I guess, make much sense for us to tackle this work without considering this, and that's the path we're planning on pursuing in this space. If anyone's got any thoughts on endpoints and specifically FHIR types of endpoints, and if you could just go into Zulip and drop your thoughts in there, that would be highly appreciated. Just also for visibility, whatever we will do in this space will also be informed by work that's already happened at an international level. So there's a few IGs for directories that are available in the HL7 repository, which have already expanded the definition of endpoint beyond what we currently have in Australia, and we would probably be, I guess, tagging along on that to come up with a proposal. But it could take us one step further in this space.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions, but there are probably people online who have questions as well. So, as chair, I'll throw to the rest of the people in the meeting first before I ask my questions. So please pop your hand up if you've got anything that you'd like to ask Ricardo about the work that's happening around endpoint and what they might bring through. All right. I might ask my questions then. So, this is related to the HCA project? Yeah.
It is. So it started, that the Health Connect Australia provider directory, as I said, introduced a profile of endpoint, but it currently only supports secure messaging. And there was some comments raised by the community as part of the community consultation process around the fact that we probably weren't looking beyond kind of the immediate requirements, and that's why we're here today. So we said, yeah, okay, look, we acknowledge that, and given that we're already doing some work for this in the context of Health Connect provider directory, maybe there's an opportunity for us to, at the same time, take some of that feedback from the community on board and look at expanding endpoints to really be a bit more future-proof, which we definitely not doing as part of this first release of the directory. But in saying that, we could start this work and the agency could kick off this work because we know we'll eventually need to support other types of endpoints in the future.
Okay, hang on. Brett has a question.
Hey, Ricardo. I just it would be good. So is this focus just really on fire endpoints initially, expanding from SMD? Yeah.
Yeah, look, it's probably the first cab off the rank. I'm not saying that's the only thing we'll do. There might be others that might be, also good candidates for this next iteration. So, I could think of things like DICOM, for example. So right now, the thinking is maybe we start with fire, but it's not confirmed yet. So if we also get some feedback through this poll on other types that we're actually asking about, we might consider including them on the proposal. But fire seems to be the next logical step, but it's not confirmed. Like it might be more than that, and we're certainly open to that.
Yeah, because I'm pretty interested in within fire endpoints is to be able to identify the actors, which role those endpoints are in. So particularly like if we're talking about like things we're working on around now, like patient summary endpoint, capable endpoints, and the e-requesting.
Those are the discussions we're already having. So I think beyond the fire endpoint, what actors do you support? Where can I find your your implementation guide or whatever?
Okay.
I think all that useful information that is complementary to just the endpoint being kind of a fire endpoint itself. I think that's the types of things we would be keen on kind of working through with the community, so it's as rich as it can be from the get-go.
Yeah, because I think that's the primary thing is to be able to identify which of the endpoints at the service you should be using for any particular business. So that'd be really good to work. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Brett. We have Heath with your hand up.
Are you likely to be doing a like a breakout session at the Connectathon on this topic? Because I think some of the things that Brett's just talked about are interesting and probably just need a more discovery kind of session.
It's not a dedicated one, but we've allocated a spot at the directory breakout to talk about endpoint. So I think that information has probably been shared back to HL7 for kind of putting together that agenda, but we won't have something just yet dedicated to endpoint only. But we'll be talking about it at the Health Connect one, and I think we have 1.5 hours allocated for that breakout. So I reckon there's probably going to be enough time to have a more.
Has that been scheduled yet, by the way?
So the breakout has been confirmed. I'll paste the details here in the chat. But yeah, it's been confirmed that we have 1.5 hours at the next Connectathon in March.
Because it's not on the Confluence pages, so I'm just booking in other breakouts, so I need to make sure that it's not clashing.
Yep. But I'll drop here in the chat.
Yeah, that page only went up this morning to start to flesh out the breakouts. So yeah, if there's slots that are needed, we need to work between co-chairs and participants to work that out. Yep.
I have a sort of similar-ish question more on timings, but this is more like overall. So we've got the Zulip poll out to get some understanding on the interest in, I think, based around the questions, like it's who's implementing now, who's already implemented, who's interested, some of the information to support an initial proposal and the focus of it. But what are the timings for when we might bring that through? Because I want to make sure that we can schedule this to, give people advance notice about the different calls they're in. Our next call is the 5th, and thinking that we would have both an information session so that people can come along and we can just go endpoint. Maybe you've never heard of it before. What is it? How does it work? And then have out an initial profile proposal with a series of points. In terms of timings, when do you think that we would be able to do that? Sorry, I'm just flicking back into February because we're actually in February right now. So we're right here, we're on the 19th. So is there a possibility of an information session in the next kind of few weeks that we could hold for the community, followed by a profile proposal? Or are you thinking that it's actually maybe much further down the AU Core R3 timeline?
I'd like to, and I can definitely put forward a proposal. I probably can't do it now, but we were actually trying to get it done in Feb, but it's just impossible. There's just too much other stuff going on at the moment. So I'm thinking this will be a March thing. What I'll do is I'm happy to take an action and just provide a bit of a high level schedule for this, but I'm thinking that a first information session probably early March, maybe after the Connectathon, so the poll doesn't close until the end of next week. I think that will probably be my thing right now. Maybe just give me a few days and I'll put forward that proposal. But I think March is going to be the month where we will probably be able to focus on that. And the reason is we're just trying to wrap up the Health Connect provider directory right now, and that once that's kind of done and dusted, I think we can focus on this one a little bit more.
Okay. And then with the target of being able to bring that through for the Spark testing event, and so with it
Yeah.
available. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Awesome.
So that's I think that's fair enough. Yeah.
All right. I think those are my questions. So yeah, I'm happy to work with you and make sure we get that scheduled and available. There is, I think it's in the email. So Tony is please define endpoint, and that is a great question. Let's just pop that there in the chat. And does anyone off the cuff want to describe what endpoint is for people? I've just linked you through to the FIRE resource.
I can't give a better answer than I'm just saying I can't give a better answer than what's on the screen. So I think that's yeah.
I can have a go.
Go for it, Brett. Go for it.
I think it's a record to allow you to define and locate technical connection points. So it gives you enough information that you know what protocols and payloads are available via a connection. So usually that's the URL. So basically you can know what protocols are running on that. So it's very useful when you want to have one system connect to another to be able to know where to connect and what to expect when you connect to that point.
And just commenting on what's in the chat, 100% endpoint
Yes.
would be a key part of record locator service.
That's exactly where you would use it.
Yep, 100%. All right, so that's where we are. We've done a bit of the planning for endpoint, and now I'm okay, way off the slides. So we're going to talk about diagnostic report. Corey, are you on the line? No. Okay, I might have misunderstood when I expected the timings. That's all right. We'll come back. And if not, I'll have a crack at it on behalf of Corey. So why don't we skip the bit on diagnostic report? Oh no, oh my God, Corey, speak of the devil. Here is Corey. Perfect timing. I'm just letting them in from the waiting room right now. Hi, Corey. Can you hear us?
Yeah, sure can.
Perfect timing. We just got to your slides.
Oh, nice. Love to hear it.
So I'd love to hand over to you. Did you want to share screen, or would you prefer for me to continue to do it and you just say things like next slide?
Yeah, if you could do it, and I'll just say next slide. I'll share I'll
Sure.
probably steal the screen share to look at the Confluence page, but
Yeah, that
for the
sounds good.
slides. All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Corey. I work at Epic and I am on the technical services team here. The thing that I wanted to talk about today was AU Core Diagnostic Report. Just wanted to give a brief overview of where we're at, where we're going with it, and what you can do to help. Because I think that'll be a big one for us in the next little bit, is making sure that we get perspective from everyone. Just wanted to briefly touch back on the proposal that we went over, or the pitch that we went over a few months ago, of just like, why do we care about diagnostic report? Diagnostic report is one of the main ways that we use in the US and in a few other of our international locales to group results. And these include mainly there's two main types of results it groups, but the main one is pathology results for the grouping, and then the other one is radiology results and some other diagnostic reports. So by implementing a diagnostic report as a part of AU Core, we would be able to say, hey, this is the way that we're performing these groupings in Australia, and this is the reason why we think it makes sense to do it that way. The and also just talking about the why now. So to ensure that it was consistent with implementation, and because this is included in US Core, AU CDI, and it's also included in IPS. If you can go next. So where are we going? We want to just like understand the current support of this right now across Australia and what vendors are doing in Australia. I'm just taking an idea of like what are people supporting right now? What coding systems are people using? And this will really help us guide us for like what do we think the proposal should be for AU Core. And then we're going to have an information session that gives a lot more of those details. And then get into the initial proposal. Slide. So what do we need right now? There's a poll that I created on Zulip that just asks about, yeah, if you want to go into here, just asks about like, hey, are you using this functionality right now? So that's what the Zulip poll is asking about. And then if you click into that vendor support page right here. So I try to just start this off by just giving a quick overview of like what we're talking about when we're talking about diagnostic report, but I do some profile comparisons. The real thing I need from you all is if you scroll down here, is everyone that is using diagnostic report currently. Scroll down even more, just talk about how you're using it. So I try to give an example right here, but basically say like, hey, are you using the identifier element, and are you using it for both lab results, and are you using it for lab results, or are you also using it for radiology and reports, and just like how are you using these elements? And then there's a section below this that talks about coding systems and how you're using them currently. So I think
Coming back to this, just checking. We're gonna ask people to people who are implementing to essentially edit this page, put the name of their system in, and fill this out with, I guess is it this legend here?
Yeah, it's a legend.
Okay, so it'd be both is B L for lab pathology only and R for report or note only.
Yeah. And the reason I have it, I made this a little more complicated than just saying whether you support it or not, is I think this will really help inform whether we need to split this out into two different profiles. For US Core, for reference, like it is split out into two different profiles, one for labs and one's for report/notes. Like for the current like AU base and like the preview version of AU Core for Australia, it is only one profile. So I think that will help inform that like very core level decision there.
And then in terms of filling out this table,
Mhm.
could you just talk to that a little bit more on how people can do that?
Yeah, I tried to give an example of it right here, but really I'm just trying to ask like when you're returning this element, what are the values that you're returning in it? And so I gave an example right here. So I talk about the AU core fire binding. I put in like what is used in ADRM because I think this might be the one that people are currently using to report on like pathology results and diagnostic results right now through ADRM. But then also just basically put on like what coding system are you using? So for code, I put Link because that's what that is what's required as part of IPS, and for US core. So that's what we support as Epic, as the server, and then you can talk about like what do you use for conclusion code, and if you don't support it, you can just leave it blank.
Okay, and I just want to check, Richard, your hand was up earlier, but it looks like it's down now. Did you have a comment or a question you wanted to ask?
I had a quick question. You
Mhm.
mentioned a lab and report note as distinct categories for people to classify in. Does everybody here understand the difference between lab and report note and know what they refer to? I know I don't, but then I don't specialize in this area.
So even back up here, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, and
Did you just want to talk to that briefly, Corey?
yeah, sure. When I say lab, I mean pathology, and when I say report/note, I mean everything that's not pathology. And maybe that's the easiest way to think about it at a
I,
really core level.
So
yeah,
just out of interest for the pathology one, are you talking generated like instrument level reports as in lab, or you're also talking about dictated, annotated like histology type reports?
Yeah, for
So everything pathology lumped under path, and then everything else goes under the other profile.
yeah, I guess I I need to. That's a great question, and I believe that it is just clinical pathology. So like instrument generated ones. I don't actually fully remember off the top of my head, and I can look at that really quick.
Mm-hmm. And Philip?
Hey, Corey. I would
Hey.
say it's kind of more the, I guess, dictated notes or handwritten notes, interpretations that you'd expect to see with AP, et cetera.
Mhm.
Not that it couldn't necessarily be the kind of PDF of discrete pieces, but at least in the US, most of your discrete information would sit in a separate piece. So like when we think of, chemistry, hematology, et cetera, those kinds of items would be more discrete rather than the report that often is the case here in Australia, at least.
so I think some guidance on the use of the terms, probably in both next to the Zulip poll and in the Confluence, will then give you much better data.
Okay, I think that's very fair.
I think it's also a good topic for like the information session kind of format of where we go. What are we even talking about? How do you use these? Does this work in Australia or not?
I'm hoping that like if you have a split, if your system has a split, you will recognize and understand the split
Mm.
as you're filling this out. But I definitely do recognize that like I think for future sessions as folks that are looking at these, and in general, it's useful to fill out that information. So I will go back and fill that out.
And just before we go on to the other hands up, it looks like Andy, I suspect, given what you'd answered about yes report/no, that there is a split there. And so Andy's put in, I think, for Magentas like yes, and specifically radiology. So that's, I guess, another thing to know that you can select, and you can also add new options when you're trying to fill out this Zulip poll. If these options don't make sense to your system, you can use the new option bit to add in what does make sense for your system.
I think, yeah, I was just going to jump in if I can. This is Brett. I think as far as like the public reporting stuff, the state of the art is the V2 spec, because that's what pretty much all the GP systems and specialist systems are receiving. So I think we have to probably consider that as the existing standard, because like essentially millions of those messages are following that pattern being sent every day. So yeah, which I think, Andy, that would be part of your world. Oh, he's not here.
Mm.
Oh, that's all right. But yeah, I think the GP system people as well will be receiving a lot of those. Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of hands up, Philip, your hand is still up, so I'll double check. Did you have anything more to say, or is that just it's still there?
I've got something to say.
All right, please go ahead.
Uh, I, from a clinical point of view, these blood test results will have a normal range attached to them. So that you can identify whether something's out of range or not. There are problems with interpretation of what is a normal range.
Yeah.
So that can become an issue, because some of this data, I assume, will go to public health. If you look at where they collect things like cholesterol and various other things to use in their health reports and so on. And the problem there is that if their definition of what's normal may not in fact be correct. There has to be a way to reinterpret this so that we don't have improper results going through and skewing what public health then actions.
Yeah, I actually don't think that is necessarily a problem for a diagnostic report. And the reason I say that is that that's actually a problem for the underlying observations that are a part of diagnostic report. We really need to think of diagnostic report as the grouper of these things. And then we already have the pathology result observation, and that's where something like a reference range would be included. So this is the grouper of those observations, and we'll have references to those observations, but we would not have anything like a reference range within this diagnostic report itself.
It's part of a diagnostic report. It has to be.
And I think that's one of the things that we'll discuss on what, and I think that was what Corey's going to, and I think you're echoing there about how do we group all of this together, grouping those observations into a report to make sure that the information needed is available.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we're all on the same page. That's definitely a very hard problem. I think it's just talking about how we're solving it.
And Heath, you've had your hand up.
I don't know if it's exactly what you're alluding to in the poll, but and whether it's worth mentioning that there is US Core has a really good page about, I think you were mentioning this overlap between sort of documents or notes and pathology reports, and it might be just worth putting that link up so that people can have a look at it, because I found that really useful and interesting on that there is this overlap between document reference and diagnostic report, and probably sets a little bit of the context that you're working in, Corey, internationally as well.
Yeah, definitely. I was honestly going to probably copy and paste a lot of that from when I was talking about going in and updating this. So I really appreciate that call out, Heath.
All right. So is there anything else we should I think I've navigated away from the Confluence page, haven't I? Oh, no, it's here. Is there anything else just to give tips to people who, and obviously we've got some people this is really quite relevant for, when they fill it out? Anything else we should be saying?
I think if you have I put some discussion points that I could think of off the top of my head down below, just for things that I was thinking through. If you have any other ones where you're this is something that we need to make sure that we're thinking about, you can stick them down there. And then I just have profile references to everything else down there if you want to go take a look at all of the profiles.
Because I think we've already got a comment here, and that could be the way that people add additional discussion points as well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, just feel free to add a comment.
All right. Okay, so I'll go back from the Confluence page just to the slides now. Okay. So I think we're coming to the end of that now.
Yeah. Last one is just please reach out to me on Zulip if you are extremely invested in diagnostic report, and especially if you're working with a radiology or a pathology or radiology provider.
And we've got a hand up immediately. Sounds amazing. David.
Yeah, hi. I was only going to say I'm no expert on diagnostic reporting, but we have done a lot of work in the college as part of SPEAR, and happy to help and point people in the right direction if that's useful.
Sounds amazing. Heath?
I'm just looking at the wiki page and I'm seeing that there's a reference to something called a current AU Core Diagnostic Report Profile, which is actually pointing to a legacy page of AU Core. I'm concerned that that will confuse people because
Yeah,
I think we're starting from scratch. And I mean, it's not to say that that's not worth looking at, but it's definitely not current. It was deprecated or deactivated or whatever the right word is.
It's never got out of draft.
Yeah.
But that sounds
draft.
good. Can we have an action for Corey to update the Confluence page
Which
and just
place was that?
say
The first heading, you've got current AU Core Diagnostic Report Profile must supports, and then you refer to you link to the
current AU Core.
0.2.2 dash preview version of it, which is basically just shouldn't be.
Yeah, it's the title that implies there's a current profile. Yeah, okay, I see that. Yes. So just for context, I suppose, the AU Core Technical Design Group did discuss, but like 2 years ago, an early kind of diagnostic report, and there's an old draft profile, and I think that's what's being referenced here, which is reasonable. There was a little bit of discussion on it, and there is an AU-based profile around that to like look at that. But I agree, referring to it as current can be really misleading.
And
Yeah, I
probably
think that's very fair.
doesn't need to necessarily be considered as gospel, for lack of a better word.
What do you, I guess for me, like, what is the terminology I should change that to? And then also does it make sense for me to even try to include references to that in here, or is that going to be more confusing than adding value?
I just don't want you to be influenced by that. If you think that these elements that are currently must support are not must support, then I wouldn't include them just because it's on this page.
It looks like this. I wouldn't. Okay. Okay. I disagree with that. There was actually community discussion held on that. I don't see why we would throw that away totally. But
It's an input, but I don't think it's the starting point as such.
I get the sense that you hate it, but okay.
No, no, I'm not saying I hate it.
All right.
I actually think there's nothing that's like incredibly unreasonable in there comparing it to US Core, to be honest. Like the biggest thing, like differences, or it's like identifier is required for the Australian one and based on it's required. So I think you're right.
Yeah, I guess the idea is that they were some ideas at a point in time rather than a settled position.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's all I was alluding to. I'm not saying I hate it. And if it aligns with you as Core and it aligns with your thinking, Corey, great.
I appreciate that context. That is actually really useful context for me, though. I will not take it as gospel, but I will use it as I will still use it as a reference.
Like if that mandatory identifier is a problem for you, don't suggest it just because it did.
No,
I think,
obviously
and
there are other
Philip,
inputs like, the NPAC requirements and other things like that that we need to consider.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think most organizations in the US actually support this base anyway. Philip can correct me if he doesn't. I believe that's true.
So what we often do is refer to other IGs like US Core, and the like. So
Which Corey has done. There's this lovely, I've not read it yet, but there's this really nice
cool
comparison table going through all of that stuff that I'm going to check out shortly, I think. That's looking really good. All right, so sorry, Corey.
Yeah, this is a draft page, so I'm more than open to feedback that folks have.
And the fact that you got the 2.2 as one of the columns in there as well is good.
Yeah.
And it shows the variances.
Yeah. Can I just check with timings like we did with endpoint? What what are your feel on timings for things like information sessions, for things like okay, we're gonna put out a request for people to contribute to this to form the basis of us understanding what's actually supported by systems in Australia, right? So I think we're going to send out an email to do that, and ask people to fill that out. So we'll have to give them a few weeks for that. Um, in terms then of timing, that does seem to me like we might be talking diagnostic report maybe in the March kind of time frame, or is that more an April sort of time frame, do you think?
Can you say those two ones again? I was half distracted on making one of the updates.
I was trying to get a picture on timings, and we will talk about this offline and then give some updates on that. Given that I think we want to send out a request for people to provide the information on what their system supports, to provide a realistic foundation for like what should the AU Core profile have as its must supports and terminology and so forth. We're going to need to send that out soon and then give like a couple of weeks for people to complete that. And then looking at like timings, I mean, we absolutely want this in for when we do our next testing event, which is probably going to be June, July. But when will we be scheduling things like information sessions or different kind of conversations? Because it's not a tiny profile, and it might be two. So I think, do you have a sense? And it's okay if you don't. We can like work offline and make sure we schedule these about like what your preferred timeframes are to try to bring proposals through to the community.
Yeah, I don't have a great idea. I want to do it earlier, sooner rather than later. We have a big gap in March where it's probably the whole Epic team will be pretty unavailable to do things. So I think like we can talk about doing an information session earlier, maybe early mid-March. Yeah.
All right.
But some of that other effort is hard for me to preview exactly like our availability, my availability to take on.
Okay. All right. Well, like get in touch with me or any of the other co-chairs. We'll support you in scheduling these, making sure there's enough space for the community to have enough time, like notice to come to those. We might be just one information session. It might be two, depending on what's getting talked about, and see. Yeah, let's start building it out together.
Okay. I'll definitely talk to you, Daniel. Appreciate it.
All right. I think that's all right. I think that's that. Okay. Let's move on to now the AU Core change request portion, which is this one. So I'm going to hand over to Heath. Did you want to share your screen?
I'm not prepared, so why don't you do it?
All right. I am doing it. People can see my screen.
Next screen.
Okay.
Okay, so this is a JIRA ticket that Danielle raised as part of the 2.0.0 ballot for AU Core. And so going back some time, and it ultimately got deferred as part of that reconciliation. So this was to consider the applicability of using the known medications code from SNOMED in some of the resources, but more particularly set to align AU Core with what is how it's being used in IPS. Now, IPS currently in its 2.0.0 allows this code of known medications in a value set that is reused in 3 different resources: the medication profile, the medication request profile, and the medication statement profile. And Danielle's basically saying that we should probably use that code, but only use that code in the medication statement resource and not in the medication or the medication request resources. But whilst doing that, we need to also think about what the status of a medication statement would be, and it doesn't refer to it, but what we have done as part of AUPS, when we've considered a very similar card, which I'll go into in a moment, is also looking at the effective date and time associated with that medication statement of no known medications. Next, please. So part of the problem that we have at the moment is that there is this code internationally in SNOMED, but it's been deactivated in the Australian version of SNOMED, and it has been deactivated for quite some time. And the reason for that is, I'm assuming, because I wasn't involved in the discussion, but as far as I understand, was that it was deemed as a little bit ambiguous because the actual meaning of the terms, the associations, is unknown, even though the term is no known medication. So from the way that it's associated, it is actually an unknown medication, which has got a different context to no known medications. So being unknownness versus knownness, that there are no medications being taken. So next, I think I've said that. Next. And I've said that. Yeah. So as part of work that we've been doing with AUPS, we basically highlighted this issue to SNOMED, and they have actually remodeled the no known medications with a new context of no known, so that it aligns with the actual intended meaning of no known medications. And as a result, I've been informed that this code will be reinstated in February 2026. What I didn't mention previously was that when we deactivated no known medications, we actually created our own Australian SNOMED code of no known current medications. And the distinction there is, and I'm sorry that image is very small on the right, but it is taken that temporal context that you can see better up the top of current or specified time or to just current. So basically, it is setting the context of specifically, as the name suggests, to the current medications, no known current medications. And that has actually been also remodeled to actually now inherit from the new term. Previously, it had a completely different structure. It was actually previously a procedure. Now it is actually a finding and modeled exactly the same and inherits from here. And the only variation in its modeling is the temporal change to just current rather than current specified. But this is an Australian-only code at this time. Next, please.
Yeah, I zoomed in. Oh no, I've got to some view that I've never going to run into before. Okay, oops. I think that's the next one. No, did I go back? No, that's
yes.
right. That's right. Okay,
Yep,
sorry.
that's the next slide. Okay. So for context, there was an IPS card that almost matched this precisely, which we actually resolved as part of the draft ballot for AUPS, I mean. And we agreed on in AUPS that we would use the Australian known medications concept as the appropriate code in an AUPS medication statement profile. We would also populate the effective date time with the date and time the statement was current, and the population status would be active. We also made statements that it should not use the current known medications code that was deactivated in Australia at the time, and that we shall not use the medication request or the medication profiles. We should not use those, the code, the known current medications code, in those other two profiles, medication request and medications. Don't worry so much about the last point. It's irrelevant to this discussion. So this is the pattern that we've set already in AUPS. In the context at the time, when we didn't have an Australian code of no known medications, but we had an Australian code of no known current medications. But as you can see through the readjustment of the modeling, this is still somewhat a valid statement. And as you can see in the should not, it's not precluding the use of no known medications. So again, it is still a recommendation for the Australian AUPS to be precise about the temporal context of being current rather than specified. Next slide, please. So all that is context to lead to what I'm proposing as, and I don't know what the process would normally be for a consider for future use. Do we reopen the same card? Do we create a new card? But either way, whatever the process is, what I'm proposing for AU Core is that we adopt effectively the same pattern, but instead of using the Australian known current medications, we actually adopt the reactivated code of known medications, but also include its descendants so that it can pick up the known current medications from Australia. We use the same pattern for effective date time. We use the same pattern for status. And we also basically state that we shall not use the code in the medication request and core medication.
I will first address the point of order, and then I'll open up the conversation to the community online. I have some questions or comments on the proposal. In terms of a point of order, the deferral says it wasn't in AU Core R2. It's not. We don't have to go through any special process to discuss and agree on how to progress any item that is in our backlog and has been deferred. We can just do so. So we're doing it now. That's totally appropriate. So that's the point of order.
So we change the resolution of the existing card if
Correct.
this proposed.
Yes, that's right. It would be
something like this
reopened.
proposal. Yep.
Yes, that's right. And discussed within the context of R3. Yes. I have a couple of comments and questions, but as I'm chairing, this should first go out to the people on the call. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this?
I like the idea of aligning with IPS when we can. So the general thrust of IPS is now, IPS and SNOMED are now in a position where we can be closer to IPS. So we should look at doing so. I completely agree with that. One adjacent thing is wanting to be able to say that between such and such, between these two dates, the person had no known medications. So that's not really the IPS situation, but outside IPS, I can imagine you will want to say no meds in 2017, and that this code that has been reactivated would be perfectly suitable for that one, and that if there's no known medicines here in March 2026, that would well use the no current medicines code. So they were the sort of two comments.
My comments are of a similar line. Because the The major difference between no known medications and no known current medications is no known current medication says at this current time, but that still has to be associated with a date time to know what currency is. And you have that through that effective date time being populated, right? But in the other one that says no known medications, and this is a specifier time or it's current, you still provide an effective date time. So I'm starting to come around to think that now that the modeling has actually aligned that, and if we always have to provide a date time, I don't actually think these two concepts from that perspective are actually different. I think they're totally the same. They're saying at this specified effective date time, which might be historical, or it might be like today, but it's still specified what that is. There are no known current meds. So that's where I'm starting to think that.
But I think Richard's point is valid that you just need a period or date time.
Which is what I'm saying is that's mandatory. So we always have that. And since we always have a date time, whether it's historical or current, there's no longer any difference in meaning between the two concepts. Because even if it's current, you would have said that, you might have said that 4 years ago. So you need to know when current was. So you always need to look at the date time or the period. And sorry, Yoni, your hand is up.
Yeah, no, I actually completely agree with the last point that you made, Daniel, because, for example, if somebody stops a blood thinner like a week before surgery, right? What is exactly current? Because that will actually confuse potentially the systems as well. So I think aligning ourselves is probably going to be less confusion rather than more confusion, given that there's always going to be a statement of date and time, like you mentioned.
Thanks, Yoni. Mandy, you're next, and then Heath.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Look, my question goes along with what Yoni just said. When we are kind of reevaluating medication, is there a possibility of known medication to be populated? So then we can go through the list because there are, as Yoni just mentioned, there are few case scenarios where they might stop a certain period for whatever reason, high INR, surgery, tests, and then they will go back on, and that might affect their whole dialogue of medications that are currently using, medications that are assist, and so on. So I was confused if there is a populating drugs available so that they can say yes or no, because sometimes patients cannot remember what they're on, being senile or, dementia and all those factors.
And look, thank you for asking that, Mandy. So the context is what we've got in AU Core now is a way to say what you're on. So that's what we've got. What we had found, and this got raised out of the patient summary scenario, is that there are often times when you say to the patient, are you taking any medications? They said no, and that's actually stored in the system, but we didn't have a way to actually send beyond our current system boundary that information. I've asked the patient, they say they're not taking anything, or even feed that in from like a patient admission process. So we were looking for a way to actually safely and faithfully say that we have a record in our system that a patient isn't currently on medication. And that's what we're looking for. But we absolutely do have that case of saying, what are they on? That's definitely in there.
Would they show at the same time, or do they have to go out of the page? My question is, if someone like medical students or people who are new to the system might not be able to think that they need to look back on that, would there be a prompt? Would there be a link alert?
So
Something that
Danielle,
would tell them
there's a
to look
hidden
back?
slide. I wonder if you want to go back to slides and
I will find us at the hidden slide, shall I?
yes, there's a hidden slide, I think, up a little bit further.
That's the one.
One more.
Oh, one more? Okay. That one?
That's the one. Yeah.
Is
So
that big
this is
enough for people?
well, if can you actually present that or unhide
I
it so you can
can. I'll
present it?
unhide it and present. Hang on.
So this was I went out to polls when I was doing this with IPS, and we got a couple of responses back from a few systems that actually support this. And my comment was to Yoni is that when someone has their medication stopped because of a procedure, you wouldn't be using this concept because in principle, you've still got medications. The idea of this concept is when you've got an empty list of medications. So the medication that you've stopped is still potentially on their list of medications, but it's in a stop state. This is when there
Yeah,
is
I'm
no
just worried about his,
medications.
sorry, an error situation. That's all.
Yeah, and so these checkboxes, to sort of Mandy's point, are basically there for you to make explicit statements that when the list of medications is empty, that there are no known medications. Not taking medications. So it's kind of mutually exclusive of having an empty list and being able to explicitly state why versus having a list that has content in it. My other comment, if I can, maybe I'll just pause before I make my original comment back to Richard. Okay, so Mandy, and Yoni, are you okay with that?
No, I'm perfectly fine. I think we're aligning
Yeah,
everything.
okay. And so back to Richard, and this is in response to your comment, Danielle. I heard Richard actually state a scenario where he's making two explicit statements at the same time. One to say, there is a known period where they were known to not be on medications, which is distinct from the second one, which is to say, as of this single point in time, there is no current medications. So I actually don't think they are the same at all. I don't think it is actually making them obsolete or the second one obsolete
I
because
think they are
of
the
the
same.
kind of, it might be a bit of an edge case, but the sort of scenario Richard's talking about could theoretically be stated.
The reason I think they are the same is you need to use the period or the date time
Exactly.
to distinguish whether it's in the past or whether it's from today onwards. You don't use the code to do your date time business. You use the date time element to do your date time business. So
And I
that's
think
why I think they're the same, or why I think that I think using just the no known meds and the date time element is the most appropriate thing to represent both of those cases. You just have different values in the date time range.
I guess one thing is we don't exchange just codes. You don't, in the world we're working in, we don't just send a SNOMED code and say, here's some information, do something useful with it. We wrap it up in a resource to give it context, like who the patient is. And part of that context is the time that this statement is about. And so that winds up falling into the situation that Danielle's describing, that you don't send the code by itself. You send the code with supporting information, and we say you will always send this code with the date context. So the current winds up becoming less important. I hadn't thought of that when I made my statement, but that's what I think now after what Danielle said.
Well, what I'm actually suggesting is that the effective period is actually the right effective choice to use when it is specified versus effective date time when the temporal context is current. But I don't want to overcomplicate the proposal, to be honest.
No, I think we can. Let's go to Brett first because he's had his hand up for a while. So before we move into some potential refinement, let's go to Brett.
I think you've covered a lot of things I was going to say, but I think, yeah, like you might have multiple periods where you're on no medications recorded. So that's a useful thing. Maybe, yeah, you might say I'm not on any current meds from a date onward. You might say I was on no meds up until a date. So this might be like if you're keeping a complete meds history they're pretty reasonable things to do. Yeah, and I think with Heath's point on current known meds, it's I think that's the whole intersection of the temporal part of the code and the effective date time. So that does create complications because I think as soon as you say current known, which was the original proposal, as soon as you say current no known meds, you have to have a date because there's no definition of current explicitly. But then using that, you can't say the other things. So I think, yeah, Danielle's point is a really good one that, this is actually the right way to do it. Cool.
All right, so we've heard from a few people, and it seems like we're actually aligning now towards actually saying, let's use the international code no known meds.
Keep going.
We understand that we'll have this date time thing
Next
populated.
one. Next one.
Next slide.
Yeah, that one.
And then I think you wanted to talk, we do have a little bit more time if you wanted to elaborate on, are you suggesting maybe guidance on when to use date time and when to use period?
I'm thinking that in the context of the more general, where it's specified or current, that when you want to specify, you use effective period, but when it's current, you use effective date time. And I hadn't actually thought about that use case when I was doing this at a ridiculous time this morning.
Okay. Okay.
But as I said, I just wonder whether we're overcomplicating it and whether we're thinking of, basically a solution to a problem that we don't have.
Yeah, I think because just using I think you just use the same code and it either applies to a point in time or it applies to a period that you say. And I
Agree.
think there's nothing else to say.
But so are we recommending, because if this code disappears, I wouldn't be that hurt. And I think it simplifies things. Are we recommending that we deactivate the Australian code?
I potentially think so, but Yoni's just popped the hand up, so go for it, Yoni.
Sorry. Yeah, look, the short answer to his question, I think, is yes. But yeah, I think deactivating may be the way forward. But just quickly, if somebody was in this situation, if somebody was on past chemotherapy drugs, and you want to refer back to that over, let's say within that same year, but somebody ticked at some point no current. No known medications at this point in time, would there be a path forward to re-review that and change and potentially even select or reselect, if appropriate, a medication that they restart later on in that year?
You can always edit a statement, but it depends on the statement. And I think that we probably don't want to be removing statements. I think that's the point around these dates, is that if it is known in a period, that statement's still valid. The fact that they then become go on drugs, then as long as there's not conflicting statements, then that's okay. But the current scenario is that there's an implicitness around that one, because it's only at that point in time that you know that they were not on drugs.
Can I add to that,
which is, I think, can add to an error. That's why I think getting rid of it is probably better.
I don't actually think it's implicit necessarily. So this is depending on what a system knows. If it's the system that knows someone's on chemotherapy, that's a series. When a series ends, what actually happens is you end up having completed, right? That says this patient has completed their chemotherapy, the schedule that they were on at a particular date and time. That's probably what's in the system. Like, it's now done, it's complete. Some other system may not have information at all about the fact they were on chemo, or it might not be something else. So it really depends.
I,
Oh,
I,
Brett?
yeah, the other thing that comes into play is looking what medication statement's doing in R6, where the statuses don't match, right? So I think all we can really say, I think it's fine to do that, but I think you should end date something that is ended, right? Yeah, or yeah, because it's that's a good way to do it. I think there's if you're presenting a current meds list, you'll have certain things on there that are selected to be current, right? So you assume the date time ranges that apply will be the ones that are relevant for currency. And so I think that's part of what like a current meds list does. Whereas if you get a whole meds history, you might get everything that's happened, right?
Now, for the purpose of today, we're going to have to start wrapping it up because we've got about 6 minutes left. So, Heath?
Um, I'll be quiet.
Okay. I might suggest that given the original proposal came from patient summary, but what's been presented today has had some updates from the terminology modeling and is different to what was agreed in patient summary, that we actually bring this proposal to the patient summary call, which is tomorrow, and see if they agree before we vote on it in core. It would be, I think we wouldn't want to conflict with what's already agreed in patient summary without having had any opportunity to talk through that. That's my perspective. And then if we would be able to bring to the next AU Core call, assuming this proposal is taken in the same way that we've just discussed today, as yes, that absolutely seems like the way forwards, then we can agree across both core and patient summary that, yep, we agree, let's do that. Heath?
When we go with straw man, at least then we can go to tomorrow's call basically saying this has been discussed. It wasn't formalized, but at least we get some sort of vibe on whether the core is going down this route,
All right,
something
I'm
like
about
what's
to straw
proposed.
man the poll. So I'm going to put up a poll if I can make Zoom work. Hello? Okay, I'm going to have to stop sharing
So,
and share.
so can I just make one amendment to what's on the screen then, and that changes the effective date time to effective X.
Which allows both period and date time, depending on what is appropriate.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to put out a poll. This is, while titled Vote for Current Motion, actually is simply indicative. We are not making a decision. If you would agree with that amendment and what's on screen, vote affirmative. If you're not sure / don't care, vote abstain. If you disagree, vote negative. We're just getting that general feel from where people are. All right, we've got 50% of people voted, so we want everybody else. All right, we've now got 70%. Please click the buttons. That's totally fine if you abstain because you're like, I don't know enough to make a decision. We are going to ask the negative people to talk to that if they're comfortable. You don't have to. And part of that is because we haven't yet heard from what should be changed. So that would be really helpful to understand what needs to be adjusted about this or what else should be considered. All right, I'm going to end that poll. I will share the results. Okay, so about half abstained, 52%. Lots were positive, but we have some feedback. If the person who voted negative, are you comfortable talking to what else we should be considering?
I think that's me.
Okay.
I think really my negative came from the fact that we don't always use medication statement when we have medication information. So to me, it feels like we would have to manufacture a medication statement in order to indicate no known medications.
Yep, that is exactly what it means. Yeah. So let's take that topic because we've run out of time to talk about it, but let's put that to our next call, which is in a fortnight, and let's go through that and discussion, and also in light of patient summary, because I think that's a topic that's also being talked at IPS about and where we're going, because it is really quite relevant for like systems that have implemented US Core, for example.
Eliza, are you attending the patient summary tomorrow?
I hope to, yes.
Okay, great.
All right.
I'll definitely now.
That sounds fantastic. All right, that brings us to the end of talking through the potential change request. We've got a relatively agreed position, but with a follow-up topic around medication statement being the one to use, that we'll also talk through in tomorrow's AUPS. We'll come back to this group then in our next fortnight's call to see what has fallen out of that discussion. And if we're still coming back with exactly the same proposal, or are there any adjustments? In terms of just wrapping it up, because we are totally at time, I'll just remind there's some Zulip channels. Go to Zulip. There's some stuff around the AU core tracks and some requests for information on if you're coming, what are you going to test out? We have in particular one element for healthcare service that we need testing of. I might send an email around for people who are coming. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but we have a must support element. It's telecom. So AU Core Healthcare Service, we have must support on healthcare service.telecom. What's interesting is we have no test evidence for it at all. So we're really looking in this next Connectathon to dig into those people who are doing healthcare service, like what do you have? Why don't you have telecom? Because maybe we need to actually change that if it's not actually being used.
There is test data available for that. There's test data available for that, and so if you're connecting to any of the reference or test servers, that will count. So we would like to know if you're accessing it. Yeah.
Thanks, Brett. Quick bit on what's next. So, okay, next week is Hobart. For those of you who are joining us, we're going into the discovery workshop around Encounter Record, which would be potentially a third AU Core TDG workshop. That has been kicking around the clinical design group, and they're pretty ready now for us in the fire space to start thinking, how does that work in fire? So that's that first one. Hope to see you there. And then 5th of March is our next call. That's where we're actually going to bring back this proposal and look to vote on no known meds in AU Core. And then we're in Sydney, 10th of March. That's in Sydney. That's the day before the Connectathon. There'll be an AU Core track. We'll try and test things through. And then we go back to our like fortnightly series of calls where I'm expecting the new profiles to actually start coming through then in March and April for endpoint diagnostic report. And who knows what else might come. That's the rough view for you for what's coming. Quick, before I go, does anyone want anything else added on to the next online call? Obviously, we're putting in this no known meds. I was also planning to send out the proposal on must support on address, which has been in our backlog. All right. Not hearing anything, I'll wrap that up, and thank you everyone for your patience. I know we've gone over time today.
Thank you very much.